And may we recognize the gentleman from the 1st District of Bohol, Representative Rene Relampagos, for his privileged speech.
The Honorable Rene Relampagos of the 1st District of Bohol is recognized to deliver his privileged speech. You have the floor, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As if the armed conflict in Zamboanga City is not enough. As if Typhoon Santi, which ravaged the provinces of Nueva Ecija, Tarlac, and Zambales, is not enough. The 7.2 magnitude earthquake in Bohol and Cebu happens in barely a minute to test once again the Filipinos' resilience to tragedies, both man-made and natural. Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues of this august chamber, I stand before you today on a matter of personal and collective privilege as a native of the 1st District of Bohol to share our experience with the 5th most deadliest earthquake in Philippine history. It has been 6 days since. Last October 15, 2013, Boholanos, some in bed taking advantage of the holiday, some barely out of bed, some just had breakfast, some preparing, and some already on their way to their day's activities, when they felt the ground shake, rocking them in all directions, literally in all directions. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. I was here in Manila when I received a call from my wife telling me about the earthquake. My whole family was in Bohol at the time, including my 87-year-old mother. Immediately the day after, I flew on the first flight to Bohol, together with my colleagues from the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd Congressional District of Bohol, Congressman Arthur Yap and Congressman Aris Aumentado. As the plane prepared for landing, I prepared myself for the worst, but nothing prepared me, Mr. Speaker, for what I will be seeing in the next hours of my travel around the province, especially my district, the hardest hit by the earthquake. Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, allow me first to describe my beautiful province. Bohol lies at the heart of the Central Visayas region, the 10th largest island in the country, with 3 congressional districts, 47 municipalities, and 1 city, Tagbilaran City, the provincial capital. Bohol is home to many tourism spots, the internationally acclaimed Chocolate Hills and Panglao Island, among others. Bohol nurtures the smallest primate in the world, the tarsiers. Bohol offers various ecotourism adventures, the Lubbock River Cruise, zipline and free-fall adventures, dolphin watching and undersea adventure. Bohol has hidden treasures, both man-made and natural. Caves, man-made forests, bee farm, butterfly garden, pristine beaches, beautiful falls, and some of the oldest houses and mansions in the country. Bohol is hometown to great Filipinos like the revolutionary Francisco de Gojoy, who led the longest revolt against the Spaniards, lasting more than 80 years. President Carlos P. Garcia, the 4th President of the Philippines, Senators Ernesto Herrera, Juan Torralba, and Olegario Clarin, National Artist for Sculpture, Napoleon Abueva, President of the University of the Philippines, Dr. Jose Abueva, basketball legends like Lauro Mumar and Bernard Fabiosa, as well as boxing champion Nonito Donaire, among others. We have also beauty queens, artists, singers, and bar top-notchers. Historically, Bohol is the site of the infamous Blood Compact in 1565, today known as the Sandugo, between Dato Sikatuna, a local native, and Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, representing the Kingdom of Spain. From then on, the province came under Spanish rule. It is for this reason that in Bohol dwells at least 29 historical and beautiful churches in the country, including some of the oldest, like the Baclayon Church, which dates back to 1595, and Lobok Church, built in 1602. Of these churches, Mr. Speaker, 6 were declared National Heritage Sites under Republic Act number 10066. All 6 heritage churches were damaged, if not totally destroyed, by the earthquake. And of the 6, Mr. Speaker, 4 heritage churches stand in my district. Mr. Speaker, allow me to just briefly describe each of these churches as my personal respects to them. These churches have not only ensured Bohol's status as one of the top destinations in the country, but more importantly, these churches gave Bohol its history, culture, and faith. Baclayon Church, the second oldest in the country, was built in 1595 on the site where the Spanish Jesuit missionaries first touched the province. It is one of the best preserved Jesuit-built churches in the region. It is said that 200 native forced laborers constructed the church from coral stones which they took from the sea, cut into square blocks, and piled onto each other. They used bamboo to move and lift the stones in position, and used the white of 1,000,000 eggs to cement them together. The carrot building was completed in 1727 and took 10 years to build. It has an adjacent museum housing artifacts dating as far as back as the 16th century. After the quake, the Bohol de Baclayon Church was partially damaged. The Lubok Church in the 3rd District is the second oldest church in Bohol. Although Baclayon was the first seat of the Jesuit missionaries, fear of Moro pirates soon forced them to move inland to Lobok, thus building the second church there. The Lobok Church, famous for its native paintings on the ceiling, showcases Jesuit and Augustinian Recollects influences in design and structure after the latter succeeded the Jesuits in Bohol. The Lobok Church was totally damaged. Another Jesuit-founded church is the beautiful Taoist Church in Panglao Island, which is predominantly Spanish in architecture, though it has a semi-modern facade. An old legend relates that once, when the town was invaded by pirates, the people of Taoist locked themselves inside the church. And when the food supplies were all consumed, a miracle happened. A well appeared at the altar, and the water from the well, which is absolutely fresh, despite being only a few meters from the sea, is said to contain healing powers. This is one of the peculiar features of Taoist Church, which makes it among the popular churches in Bohol. Also, this was partly damaged. The Luwai Church, founded on 1815, stands on a plateau facing the sea and near the mouth of the Lubok River. It is a cruciform with 2 facades, and like many churches, its interior is delicately painted with biblical scenes, and this is also damaged. The Maribohok Church was founded in 1768. Construction of the church started in 1798 and lasted 18 years. While this church has a basically simple facade, its interiors are made of 3 neo-Gothic altars, intricately carved hardwood, and ceiling made of metal and painted with liturgical motifs. After the quake, the Maribohok Church was totally damaged. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me last pay my respects to the church in the municipality of Loon, as this representation hails from this municipality, the worst hit by last Tuesday's earthquake. The Loon Church is the biggest in Bohol. It was constructed in 1753. It has fully symmetric octagonal bell towers. Wood to build the church was carried from the forest of Maitum by forced laborers who had to beat their way through uncharted trails and across rivers. This church was completely turned to rubble. Last Friday, or 3 days after the earthquake, Mr. Speaker, a body was found under the rubble of Loon Church. A lay minister who was inside the church doing his daily prayer at 8 in the morning. It was the uncle of one of my staff. This representation was not spared, Mr. Speaker, as a first cousin of mine also died when he tried to save a boy from a commercial building in my hometown of Loon. When I came to Bohol on October 16, a day after the quake, calls for distress, for rescue, and for relief came pouring in. Despite deployment of all personnel, it seemed not enough. The local government units were already stretched to the limit to answer to the calls of constituents. Besides, even government buildings and offices were affected. All seemed hopeless as transport of food supply and rescue personnel from Tagbilaran City remained difficult, if not impossible, with the bridges down and roads impassable. Some towns like Loon and Maribohok remain isolated for a time in view of the collapse of the Abatan Bridge, which connects Tagbilaran City to Maribohok and the rest of the municipalities in the west of Bohol. Mobility has been one of the major obstacles. A usual 30-minute travel to Loon took almost 4 hours after the quake. That is, if the road permits, as there are places where roads are literally turned to jigsaw puzzles. Personally, to reach Loon, I had to take a pump boat, ride a habal-habal, then take another smaller boat to the municipality. Reaching it, I was badly affected. Reaching it, I saw how almost each and every house was damaged. The district hospital was badly affected, forcing the patients to stay outside. Schools, municipal offices, commercial establishments, all were severely damaged. The 7.2 earthquake, which according to some is equivalent to 32 Hiroshima bombs, indeed left its indelible mark in the province of Bohol. The worst hit in terms of destruction and casualties are Loon, Maribohok, and Tubigon. These 3 municipalities, Mr. Speaker, are all in my district. As of the October 20, 2013 partial report from the Bohol Police Provincial Office, there are now at least 18 bridges affected and described as partially damaged, caved in, submerged, collapsed, and some totally damaged. 31 churches, chapels, and a convent found in 23 municipalities, which is practically half of Bohol, are damaged. There were 19 recorded landslides, 11 notably totally impassable roads, not to mention partially damaged roads which are all over the province. One sinkhole was discovered in Carmen. As to public buildings, there were 15 city and municipal buildings damaged, including the City Hall of Tagbilaran, and 2 municipal buildings totally damaged, and 16 police stations damaged with 2 precincts totally destroyed. As per news reports, of the 1,078 schools in the province, 536 schools in 22 municipalities were affected. So far, reports show that only the district hospital in Loon is the affected medical facility. As to casualties, of the 172, there are 172 dead. 122 are the first district. This is from the 10 municipalities and Tagbilaran City, with Loon having the most number of casualties at 54 and Maribojoc second with 14. Youngest casualties are a 4-month-old baby from Bilar and a 6-month-old baby in Cortez. Of the initial reported 489 injured, 280 are in my district. Missing persons are still reported. People who live along the shoreline immediately vacated to highlands for fear of tsunamis, while those in the highlands move in the plains for fear of landslides. And those in the plains move to open areas for fear of aftershocks. Initial and partial damage estimate by NDRRMC, the DPWH, and local government units is, as of 2 p.m. today, is placed at 3.1 billion pesos. This is purely infrastructure, without mention of loss in terms of agriculture, livelihood, and tourism. And this does not even include Tagbilaran and Catagbacan ports, that rebuilding and repairing it would cost no less than 800 million pesos. Personally, Mr. Speaker, I have never thought I would see Bohol in such a state of despair, destruction, and devastation. Not one family in Bohol is not affected by this tragedy. But 2 days after the quake, Mr. Speaker, was an entirely different story. While there are still calls of distress, calls offering help started to come. We are humbled with the surge of support for the Boholanos. Foremost is the visit of the President, His Excellency Benigno S. Aquino III, who came within 24 hours after the earthquake, bringing with him high-level members of the Cabinet to personally witness the devastation, receive our status reports, and give necessary instructions. No less than the secretaries of various departments, Secretary Mar Rojas of DILG, Secretary Dinky Soliman of DSWD, Secretary Volter Gasmin of the Department of National Defense, Secretary Enrique Ona of DOH, Secretary Babe Singson of DPWH, Secretaries Edwin Lasierda, Ricky Garandang of the Office of the President answered to Bohol's call of distress. Secretary Ramon Jimenez of DOT came in later. And we would like to mention especially Secretaries Rojas and Suliman for staying behind with us for no less than 5 days after the earthquake to personally supervise and oversee rescue and relief operations. Vice President Jijumar Binay also came, together with the National Housing Authority and Pag-ibig officials, to extend their support and assistance. Then, Mr. Speaker, came help from various government offices, even MMDA, a very territorial government agency, sent rescue teams by the afternoon of the second day. DOH sent doctors who even set up tent clinics to attend to the injured. DPWH immediately made assessments to facilitate construction of important bridges and create temporary infrastructure that will connect municipalities. 75% of electricity were restored by the end of the second day, and by the third day, only 5 municipalities remain without power. The provincial government under Governor Edgar Chato, together with his representation, Congressman Arthur R. Yap and Erico Aristotle Aumentado, and other local officials regularly convene to assess the situation, discuss updates, and ensure a coordinated and unified response to the disaster. Local government units who are at the forefront of rescue and relief deserve our salute. Colleagues from this chamber also sent help, like Congressman Emil Ong, who with friends sent solar panels for use in the municipalities. Davao City Mayor Rudy Duterte also came, and his city gave a substantial amount to the affected LGUs. Group of doctors, medical practitioners, volunteers came pouring in to Bohol from neighboring provinces from Region 6, 7, and 8. Mr. Speaker, we had nothing to offer them. No place to sleep, no food, especially those who went to the far-flung municipalities, but they were not complaining. They simply said, "We are here to help." Even those coming from Manila started arriving. Teams of engineers, architects, and conservationists also came to assess the damage to the heritage sites. Media outfits bringing relief goods tried to reach the farthest and most affected municipalities. Other private corporations sent bottles of water, food, and medicine. Some offered free freight carriage. International organizations like the United Nations and the Red Cross also immediately sent contingents for rescue and relief. Embassies also started calling, sending help and offering long-time help for housing and shelter. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, volunteers, ordinary people who, despite being affected themselves, unselfishly offer their services to receive distress calls, pack and deliver relief goods, and all kinds of mundane tasks, showing the true Filipino bayanihan spirit. Also by this time, neighbors started to open up. Houses with electricity offered free cell phone charging. Owners of meat shops and sari-sari stores rationed food to their neighbors. Water was shared. Temporary shelters were shared. Neighboring municipalities brought water to affected municipalities through boats. Help came from all fronts, by land, by water, and by air. Acts of kindness, little and big, gave the Boholanos the reason to hope. And this is what keeps us standing every day, even as aftershocks continue to haunt us, Mr. Speaker. Aftershocks sometimes as high as magnitude 5.5, and that has reached more than 2,000 as of this day, which is expected to go on for another 2 to 3 weeks, and who knows until when. Mr. Speaker, in every tragedy, there are blessings. Bohol thanks that the earthquake happened on a holiday, that it was not a Sunday, that it was at 8 in the morning when people are awake but not yet in the malls, that it was not a magnitude 9 earthquake like in Indonesia and Japan, and that there was no tsunami. Otherwise, the destruction and casualties could have easily tripled and quadrupled. We count as blessings the fact that even as our churches were damaged, Bohol still has a lot to offer. our ecotourism adventures, our tarsiers, our chocolate hills, though some of these hills have seemingly melted. Our falls, caves, forests, pristine beaches, and underground adventures remain intact. We also count the blessings of unity, brotherhood, and the care of strangers and the whole country in helping us. More importantly, there is the blessing of the capacity to help Bohol, just like what this august chamber can do, Mr. Speaker. Let Congress then, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, be the guardian of culture and heritage in this country. Let Congress then, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, ensure that disaster preparedness and risk reduction is given highest priority in every barangay in the country. First, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation seeks the formulation of a Bohol recovery program to help the province get back on its feet. To do this, we propose the creation of a Bohol Rehabilitation Fund. And to do this, we need the help of our esteemed colleagues in this chamber and our colleagues in the Senate. The 3.1 billion pesos identified by DPWH, the Bohol LGUs, and NDRRMC was only the initial estimate of the damage caused to the province. We are still to include the cost of rehabilitation, restoration, and other estimates, especially for the first district, as evaluation of the damages are yet to be determined. We seek the Senate's gracious intervention, Mr. Speaker, to include the Bohol Rehabilitation Fund in the 2014 General Appropriations Act, as budget deliberations in the Senate has just started plenary deliberations. While in this chamber, it is already for third reading, approval for third reading, as far as the General Appropriations Act of 2014 is concerned. To serve as initial fund, however, Mr. Speaker, we seek a joint resolution from this chamber and the Senate to allow the realignment of available or unused funds in the 2013 General Appropriations Act to be allotted to Bohol and other provinces affected by natural disasters like Nueva Ecija, Tarlac, and Zambales due to Typhoon Sante. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this humble representation seeks the mandatory restoration and retrofitting of all historical and cultural sites left in our country. It is hard to believe and accept that these heritage sites, which have stood for centuries, crumbled in less than a minute of the earthquake. This is for us and our children, that we will always have something to look back to, lest we forget where we have come from and the sacrifices made by our forefathers for freedom and democracy. Learning from the lessons of Undoy, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation, as a third proposition, seeks the modernization of PhilBox. I would like to think, Mr. Speaker, that after Undoy and the subsequent modernization of Pag-asa, we are now more prepared to face typhoons. However, this is not the same for earthquakes. This modernization of PhilBox, Mr. Speaker, will be for the purposes of updating the current Philippine geohazard map to include suspected faults, ensuring accurate prediction of occurrences such as this to prevent loss of lives and property, purchase of necessary equipment, and formulation of guidelines and programs to highlight prevention and risk reduction. This is inevitable, Mr. Speaker, considering that our country, the Philippines, is located within the Pacific Ring of Fire, which makes us vulnerable to natural catastrophes. Mr. Speaker, Bohol, under the geohazard map of PhilBox, has only one fault, the East Bohol fault. Yet, the earthquake last Tuesday affected the west side of Bohol. The initial declaration of Carmen as the epicenter of the earthquake soon changed after 2 days to an area located between the towns of Sagbayan and Katigbian, and the finding of a new fault connected to the Cebu fault. This fault line, according to PhilBox, was suspected as early as 2007, and they have predicted as early as then that something like this would happen. But have we been informed, Mr. Speaker? Have other local government units, Mr. Speaker, been informed and alerted of suspected fault lines not found in the current geohazard map? It is high time that the Philippines increase its disaster and risk reduction programs in all municipalities and barangays. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation seeks the mandatory allocation of free freight for medical supplies and relief goods of all aircrafts and shipping vessels. While we acknowledge the free freight services offered by our airlines and shipping companies in this earthquake, for which we are most grateful, we seek its institutionalization together with the formulation of regulations to ensure that freight services will also not be adversely affected. Fifth, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation seeks the review of the guidelines on the use of calamity funds as far as disaster preparedness is concerned. The Bohol earthquake experience showed that transportation and mobility is a major challenge after a disaster due to lack of trucks and vehicles to move rescuers, relief goods, medicines, and necessary immediate interventions to the places affected. LGUs must at least be given the opportunity to improve its disaster preparedness through the calamity funds without necessary vehicles and other equipment and facilities which are not otherwise allowed under the present guidelines. Six, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation seeks a review of the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Resolution and related guidelines that prohibits the grant of another ambulance to LGUs or other beneficiaries within 5 years from the previous grant. While this is understandable, there should be some exceptions, Mr. Speaker. In the Loon District Hospital, for example, their ambulance figured in an accident. However, considering that the ambulance is less than 5 years old, PCSO refused to replace the same. Hence, not an ambulance in Loon District Hospital was available during the rescue operations last week. This is also true in the municipality of Antequera. Seventh, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation also calls on the GSIS, the SSS, Pag-ibig, and other financial institutions and banks to grant special calamity loan packages, housing loans, and loans for business purposes. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, this representation seeks to thank all who helped Bohol in this tragedy, starting from President Aquino, the Vice President, the members of the Cabinet, especially to Secretaries Mar Rojas and Dinky Soliman, all local government officials, other government agencies, the international community, the private sector, and ordinary Filipinos who did what they could in their own special way. Allow me just to mention, Mr. Speaker, that COMELEC has just this morning finally decided the postponement of the barangay elections in the whole province of Bohol. This representation, together with Governor Chato and Congressmen Yap and Aumentado, had a dialogue in Bohol with Chairperson Brillantes. We lamented that pushing through with the elections at this time will just cause unnecessary distractions and hamper the delivery of services. Further, this is to focus all energies on relief and rehabilitation that is badly needed in Bohol. No help is too little for the Boholanos, Mr. Speaker. One bottle of water, one can of sardines can save a life. Now, more than ever, Bohol needs all the support for rebuilding. Does not happen overnight. Bohol needs a more sustainable recovery program. And prayers, even the simplest and the shortest ones, will come a long way. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, we grieve over the ruin of our churches, but we know that nothing will destroy our faith. We grieve over the loss of our loved ones, but we rejoice over all who survive. We grieve over the damage made to our houses, but we don't mind sharing the same sky and stars for a few nights. We grieve over the destruction of our schools, but we value the learning experience we had through this earthquake. But we do not grieve, Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, over the earthquake that rocked Bohol. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we are deeply grateful for this opportunity given us by the Lord Almighty, as this experience strengthened our faiths, made us count our blessings, helped us value what really matters, and made us see and feel the love of neighbors, volunteers, and strangers who unselfishly shared themselves, expecting nothing in return. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, we know that this experience united our province and our nation, not to mention all the Filipinos overseas who expressed and sent help. Together, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues, we can rise above the rubbles. No earthquake can shake our faith and resilience, for together we can make sure that it is and will always be more fun in the province of Bohol. Thank you and good day to all.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, on a matter of collective privilege,
The majority
the
leader
1
for-
hour for our privilege hour has already expired.